Right, welcome everybody back to Calming Chaos session number 10 today. So that means we've been in this whole lockdown, kind of partial lockdown situation for about 10 weeks. I think many of us are starting to settle in and also trying to move back to partially more open and less restricted. So I hope everybody's well. Anyway, today's question for you, just to get you started thinking, is what kind of emotional impact do you have on the people around you? Do you have a calming impact, an optimistic, positive impact, or a doom and gloom impact? What kind of impact do you have? Because today's session is about optimism, as you know, with Victor Perton, who's the Chief Optimism Officer. And so I would love to explore this impact that we could potentially have, which I'm sure if you were sitting around with other people with infectious optimism, that would be an amazing thing to do. So that's today's topic. Let's start off with calming chaos, though, in terms of, whoopsie, you don't need to see my diary, do you?
Oh, it's an interesting diary.
Interesting diary, I know. However, I want to share this one. So I normally, for the first 10 minutes, Victor, I just go through just a refresher on the calming chaos ideas and check in with everybody, particularly those of you coming regularly to check in to see how everybody is going over this time. Now, just a quick request for people who have just joined, if you could mute and video off, that'll be great. I can actually hear somebody.
What happened to my mind?
If there's a pause button, that would be great. I can't see the participants box.
You just need to.
Here we go. I've muted there. So I do have the power to mute people, but I couldn't see the box. Anyway, so for the duration of at the beginning, if you can have your mute and video off. When we get into conversation later on, we may ask you to turn video on if you want to join in the conversation. The other thing, if I could ask you, is to bring your mobile device, have your mobile device handy, as I'm going to ask you a little question at the beginning and possibly at the end as well. And we do use the question and comment and the chat box. So if you have any questions along the way or any comments as we have this conversation, please do add your comments there. I'll keep an eye on that throughout the session. And also, you do have permission to share this recording. I will share the recording with you after the session later this afternoon. So, so today's session will be very much about, oops, oh, what am I doing? Sorry, I'm just fiddling around with the screen and here we go. Let me kick off with, so for those of you who haven't met me, a number of you have come along a few times, so you know me, but those of you who haven't, my name is Megumi and I am the founder of Quietly Powerful, which is a movement / program / idea that I started to share about 4 years ago because of my quieter nature. And I felt like this quality of quiet was being undervalued. So one of the feedback that I often get is this, people tell me, oh, Megumi, you've got this calming influence. And I just keep on getting this. And part of it is to do with having a Japanese face that doesn't show a lot of emotion, which is kind of handy. But part of it is that I have learned a lot about just being calm and finding ways of being calm. And so that's what I started to share. And then I thought, well, there's other people who know about some things that help to be calm and also positive in this kind of challenging environment. So I've started to ask all these guests to come along, and today is Victor's turn. So this Calming Chaos session runs weekly. I ask people, if you can, please pay, but if you can't, don't. You're very welcome to join without paying. I have been donating 20% of the proceeds to the food bank, which has been wonderful to do. The 4 strategies that I shared in my very first session back in March, if you're interested in it, please go back and in the www.megumimiki.com Calm in Chaos, we'll have all these and I'll send you the link afterwards. But the very first session, I talked about 4 mental strategies that I use in managing my state and being calm. And I'll just briefly share, and I'll ask all of you to think about the last week, how you went with this kind of usage of your mind, if you like. So the first one is accepting, and accepting whatever is happening, as well as accepting our feelings, rather than making it right or wrong. We often label things too quickly. We say, oh, that was a bad situation. In fact, it may not necessarily be. So just accepting what it is as it is one strategy. So even our feelings, because the worst thing you can do is to worry about our worrying. So that's one of the strategies that I shared. The second one is around pause, which we will do in a moment, just as our regular practice. And that is to take that moment to breathe, to meditate, whatever practice you do, so that you create that pause so that you can think things through more clearly, which allows you to do the third and fourth strategy, which is about reframing and adapting. And reframing is very much about today. You know, how can you see things with an optimistic lens? It is a reframe. So there are many other reframing examples that I shared in the first session. So you may want to have a look at that. So thinking about things differently, because the world's turned upside down, we have to turn upside down to think about it differently, which also helps with adapting, which is very much what we need to be able to do now, because things are changing and it is also uncertain. So if we're not moving along with what's going on, then we can be left behind. So this is the interactive bit. If you could go to your device and open up a browser and go to menti.com. This is a tool that I use to get some feedback on how people are going. How did you go in the last week around accepting, pausing, reframing, and adapting? So let me share with you the code so that we can, here we go. So I don't know if you can see the code on here. I'm hoping you can. It's 513876. 513876. So just a quick reflection for yourself in the last week. How do you think you've managed yourself? How do you feel you've managed to accept rather than make things right or wrong? How do you think you've managed to pause, deliberately find that space for yourself so you can step back? And how have you managed to reframe situations or things or the way that you're thinking so it's working for you? Or how have you managed to adapt as a result, or finding different ways to adapt? So let's see how people have gone in the last week. Okay, so a few people in the accepting and adapting as being higher. This is quite a common pattern, Victor. It's really interesting. And pause and reframe are the ones that tend to be a little lower. Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And there may be more people who vote, but I'll stop there for now. Yeah, so that's some strategies you may wish to think about. And all of the guests that I've been inviting have been looking at these elements. So today is very much about reframing, thinking about things differently. And last week I had Paul Michel, who spoke a lot about relaxation, meditation, and the science and the practicalities of that, which is very much about pause. So yes, we will keep on building on these. All right, so let's do just a quick 2-minute pause before we speak with Victor so that we can be in the most resourceful state to be able to learn. So if you can just find a comfortable position in your chairs or wherever you're sitting and just start to notice your breathing. For some of you, it might be breathing in the chest, higher up in the chest. Some of you may already be breathing deeper into the belly. Wherever it is, it's okay. If you can just start to notice where it is and very gently and gradually deepen your breathing, which should allow you to deeply breathe into the belly, just gradually. And if you want to close your eyes, please feel free to do so. You don't have to. You can just watch the beautiful screen there with the blue, which is very calming. And as you breathe, just gently, without forcing, deepen and slow down your breathing. And as you deepen and slow down your breathing, do a quick scan of your body to see if there's any tension in your head or your face, your eyes, your tongue, your jaws, shoulders. If you notice any tension, just breathe it out. And as you get used to the deeper, slower breathing, if you can gradually move towards breathing in for 4 counts and breathing out for 8 counts. Breathe in for 4. And breathing out for 8. Paul Michel last week shared with us that breathing out for 8, and so longer than the inhale, triggers the relaxation response. It's been studied. And so that's why we do the breathe in for 4 and breathe out for 8. In for 4 and breathe out for 8. Okay, just take a deep breath in and out. And some of you may not want to come back, but please gradually come back to the room. Okay, it's always hard once you get into that relaxed state to come back to the screen, but hopefully now you feel a little bit more calm and centered so we can do some learning with Victor today. So let me introduce you to Victor. Victor asked me one day this question, what makes you optimistic? And I thought, wow, that question in itself made me optimistic. And it was a wonderful question to be asked. And so since then, I was interviewed for some of the research that he's doing, and I've been following some of his work. And I thought, what a wonderful time to be thinking about optimism right now, because it's almost not just wonderful, I think it's critical, given where we could end up if we don't hold some of that optimism. So I think it's a wonderful thing to be able to talk about. So thank you, Victor, for joining us today.
It's a great pleasure, Megumi.
Victor is the Chief Optimism Officer of the Centre for Optimism. And now that I also know that he's done a whole lot of things in his career, so it's a really interesting background that he brings as well. So I'll stop this and we can have a chat on screen. So Victor, can I please start with a bit about yourself? I'd love to hear a bit about your journey and how you ended up in this world of optimism.
Yeah, so if we go right back to the beginning, to the history, my parents and grandparents came to Australia as refugees. So history has a big play in my optimism. So my grandfather was actually executed in 1940, tortured to death by the KGB. My grandmother was sent to the Gulag. My other grandparents were refugees from 1940 to 1950 and stateless. And so everything I do, every problem I've got is in that perspective that, you know, wow, what have previous generations put up with? And compared to that, life in Australia is much easier, and we have the same personal problems, but not the warfare and destruction. And then my father died when I was very young, and my mother had to work 3 jobs to keep my sister and me in school. And but she found her way into yoga and became a yoga teacher very early in Australia, and was still teaching yoga until the end of last year at the age of 91.
Wow.
And so incredible resilience and positivity came from her. And then in my youth, I became a barrister, a young barrister. Then at the age of 28, I was elected to the state parliament, and 18 years really flashed by, but it was the beginning of the internet, and you know, we were empowered to think global, and many of the things we predicted that we thought would happen in 5 years are actually happening now. But Bill Gates wrote about what we were doing in business at the speed of thought. We were at the cutting edge. But in 2006, I thought, look, politics has become too negative. I left. And then I had the good fortune to become Commissioner to the Americas. And so I was doing trade promotion and foreign direct investment recruitment right across North and South America. And everywhere I went, there was this incredible positivity towards Australian leadership. The chairman of Caterpillar said to me, "You Aussies remind me of the Americans of 100 years ago." The chairman of the Rio Olympics said, "I want Olympic Games like Sydney, a legacy like Melbourne '56." And it was just an incredible positivity. And then I had a more remarkable activity still. I was then senior advisor to the Australian G20 presidency. And at that super elite level of presidents, prime ministers, finance ministers, it was exactly the same, this incredible trust in Australia. After that, I came back to Melbourne and it was like a different planet. It was like the only people in the world that didn't get Australian leadership were Australians. The conversation was so negative, not just about politicians, it was about every aspect of leadership. So rather than complain about the complainers, Megumi, I set up the Australian Leadership Project and we interviewed 2,500 people.
Mm-hmm.
Cutting it short, the three qualities of Australian leadership we reckon are strongest are egalitarianism, self-effacing humour, and no bullshit plain speaking. Now, if those are the qualities of Australian leadership, there are millions of people like that. You're like that. Most of the people in this call are like that. So I was still bewildered by the negativity. And my eureka moment came at the Global Integrity Summit. I was on the last panel in 2017 and I changed the topic of my speech to the case for optimism. And after 3 days of misery, this speech electrified the room. And Alan Clark, who was then the head of the UNDP, the former New Zealand Prime Minister, said, "Vic, you've got to turn that into a book." And I did, and she endorsed it. And eventually the question became to everyone I met, whether they were president or prime minister or a lady digging a ditch in India, is what makes you optimistic? And we've now interviewed nearly 10,000 people face to face. And in August of last year, we set up the Centre for Optimism. In January, we decided to open it for membership. And in those 4.5 months, we now have 2,000 members, including leaders from around the world and 43 countries represented.
It's incredible. Yes, and your personal story behind that is pretty incredible. So what does make you optimistic?
Well, as I said, I think it's history.
Yeah.
So, observing what happened to my ancestors and how they were resilient and strong throughout. My mother has been a particularly strong example. And then in my day-to-day life, I mean, I'm a bit blessed because I run the Centre for Optimism. So I get up at about 5 in the morning. I meditate, just as you've done now. And I love your meditation voice. It's a beautiful meditation voice. So I meditate first. Then I spend an hour reading clippings from media, from social media, on people writing about optimism. And then typically I'll share something. There's always 2 or 3 people who've shared something new in the optimism field with me. And then almost daily now, we're running a webinar, optimism and energy, optimism at a whole range of affairs. So for me, meditation, yoga is a critical part. Surrounding myself by optimists, smiling. People forget to smile.
Yes.
It's so easy to do, but so easy to forget. And I make a real point. If I walk down the road, I say hello to every stranger and smile at them. And then laughing, I make a little time for comedy every day. We've got to laugh like an optimist is what we say. So in essence, I surround myself with optimists and I've gone on a news diet. You can imagine, Megumi, when I was a politician, you were sort of riveted to every half hour in case you were on the news.
Yes.
Now I've put myself on a real news diet and if I spend half an hour on the news, that would be now an unusual day.
Yeah. No, there's some really practical tips in there too, in terms of how you maintain your optimism, especially in these times where you do get a lot of doom and gloom in the media. And I also had a question, actually. I'll just follow on with what you were just saying. There was somebody who said, I tend to be quite pessimistic. She recognizes that in herself. And she asked, is that how you're born, or is it something you learn?
The science says it's about 25%.
25%.
So most of optimism is your own decisions.
Right.
And we actually did a global survey in March, which actually matched the science. It was really interesting.
Okay.
The most important aspect of being optimistic is actually life experience. You don't hit peak optimism till you're in your late 50s or 60s, when you realize that the normal anxieties of life are the normal anxieties of life. And so if you are, if you do feel you're more pessimistic, the first question to ask yourself is the one that I asked you, Megumi. What makes me optimistic? So even if you're pessimistic, people see something positive through the eyes of their children or their grandchildren. A lot of people find it through their faith in God or their faith in humanity. It's looking at the incredible things that are happening in science. But if you watch the news, it's very easy to have your pessimism reinforced. You really do have to go on that news diet, because the news editor of the ABC went through a week of news with me last year. And in that week, every story was negative bar two, and they were ambiguous. So if you're getting your information about the world from the news, you are going to have a pessimistic mindset. So the guru, of course, of positive psychology, Martin Seligman, is himself naturally pessimistic. And so, there's this range of tools. Gratitude is a really important underpinning. My children and a lot of adults will keep a gratitude journal by their bed. My kids and I do it around the dinner table. What are the three best things in the day are the basic question. So, so if you are pessimistic, and Megumi, anyone who wants more of this material, on the Centre for Optimism, I've done a discount code Megumi. So if they're a friend of yours, they get a free subscription.
Oh, fantastic. Amazing.
Go through the 7 habits of the optimist and all of the material underpinning. And they're really welcome to give me a call afterwards too. I'm more than
that's
happy
amazing.
to chat it through.
Thank you. That's really
But
generous.
we did 3 sessions in prison with some of the worst murderers and drug traffickers in the state of Victoria. Their behaviour changed so much that Sue Barrett and I were asked to do a half-day session for the general managers of prisons on optimistic leadership. So even, the people who are locked away and incarcerated, you can actually lift their optimism. And one of a fellow, I won't name him, but he is one of the worst gangland killers. He said, he looked around at the others and he said, you listen to Vic. You want to survive in here, you're going to have to be an optimist. You want to thrive when you get out of here. It's going to be hard to get a job, hard to get a business loan. You're going to have to be an optimist. But I tell you what, if you muck up and come back in here, you'd be a complete ... witch. He can become a professor of psychiatry when he gets out of jail.
Amazing. Oh, wow. So that's really a positive news, isn't it, in that you can learn to be optimistic, and it's really in managing how you think and what questions you ask yourself, which is, I think, is a great practice. And so the other question, I suppose, is, can you be overly optimistic or blindly optimistic? So there was another question too about, is there too much of a, seeing the world through rose-colored glasses, and is that not necessarily a good thing?
Well, sadly, I've lost my pair of rose-coloured glasses. I did have a Maui Jim pair that were beautifully rose-coloured.
Really?
But, I've lost them and I can't replace them. So how we define optimism is the one that Harvard, Stanford, Oxford uses, which is optimism is a belief that in the end, everything will work out, that good things will happen. And if you go right back to the 13th century, to the female mystic, Mother Julian of Norwich, all will be well, all will be well, all manner of things shall be well. That's the real belief. So it's not a silver lining in every dark cloud, which is the positive thinker. The positive thinker says, oh, in every dark cloud, there's a silver lining. Or the Pollyanna, this brightness even in the midst of disaster. So there are times when you've just got to look sad with someone.
Yeah.
There's lots of people whose elderly relatives have died unexpectedly in the last month or two from COVID, and all the time people go through tragedy and grief and closure of business and bankruptcy and, also illness. So the true optimist, what we foster in a realistic and infectiously optimistic leader, is empathy for those who are going through grief. but then that belief that things will always work out in the end. And I actually recorded a meditation the other day with Mother Julian of Norwich, and just repeating that mantra, all will be well, all will be well, all manner of thing will be well. But I actually read a piece by or an interview with one of the famous New York fashion ladies the other day, one of the top designers. And she said, oh, I was always a Pollyanna. She said, being I always thought I can do anything I want to be. And here I am now, one of the world's top designers. So for some people, you know, unrealistic or total optimism works, but we always say realistic and infectiously optimistic leadership. And Mick Farrell's a good example of this, the head of ResMed, you know, the snoring machine company. They save more marriages than any marriage counsellor can. And he says if you're running a medical device firm, you know, you have to be an optimist because you're always trying something new, you're competing with the big boys. But it's got to be an optimism grounded in reality, a good strategy, a good business plan, and a good, may I use the phrase, oh shit plan?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so that's the realism coming in, isn't it? That, you know, you have the backup plan, you have everything there, and still have the optimism to say it will work out.
Yeah, you know, there's famous French philosopher who said, you know, it doesn't matter how dark the hour is,
yeah,
the sun will rise tomorrow.
Which is true. So it's I like that definition of it will work out in the end. I think that's and the journey may be varied.
It hasn't worked out, it's not the end.
Yes, that's a good point. That's a really great way to think about it. So what about helping others? So there were some questions about how do you create an optimistic team? How do you help people who are always pessimistic or always seeing the dark clouds and the doom and gloom? How can one help people?
Split them away. Really, the work we've been doing shows that you have to explicitly talk about optimism.
Okay.
And two of the Australian billionaires have actually said to me that self-made guys have said that they won't have a pessimist around their board table. Okay. They can buy them from the hour from accounting firms and law firms. And so it's this notion of surrounding yourself with optimists. So I did a couple of workshops, for instance, for the New Zealand Tax Department. And all my friends in New Zealand now hate me because they much prefer to have the tax department anxious and depressed rather than lively and productive. But with them, we did exactly the same workshop that I do with prisoners. And it, you know, I do the case for optimism, the why and the how. But then we go around the table slowly and we ask everyone that same question, what makes you optimistic? And you don't restrict it to work. And in doing that, you learn so much about other people. And wherever I've done it, it's been a success. A lot of firms have then asked me to do family and friends events. So everyone listening, if you've got an exec team that you run, or a team that you run, or you're part of a team, maybe the next meeting is the right one, but make sure you give people notice. You don't spring it upon them. You give them the definition on the agenda, you know, that optimism is a belief that everything will work out in the end. And you go around the table slowly, what makes you optimistic? And you will find that people will talk to you about faith. In the tax department, one woman talked about her husband recovering from bowel cancer. And it had been 9 months of treatment, and the only thing that had got them through was faith and optimism. In the prison, there was a notorious drug trafficker who'd suffered from cancer. And he said, my cancer surgeon said to me, the only thing that's going to get me through is optimism. And the prisoner next to him, after he told his story, the prisoner next to him had arms the size of my waist, you know, just like a muscle man. He was so moved, he actually couldn't speak.
Wow.
So I'd really suggest that if you want to build an optimistic environment in a team or a firm, the first thing to do is to understand what makes everyone else optimistic. And even the most pessimistic person, you know, they say, oh, I'm not optimistic at all. You say, well, it's just something, you know, that cheers you up or good. And Martin Seligman, I actually, it was one of those almost godly coincidences. He was walking down the corridor towards me and he loves my question. But he says, look, if someone doesn't get optimism, what you might do is rephrase the question. So
Mhm.
the first time you ask it, as I did to you, Megumi,
Yeah.
what makes you optimistic? If they look at you too quizzically, say, what makes you optimistic? What gives you hope?
Mm.
But Megumi, I'll tell the audience, I quote you in every speech. Whether I'm speaking nowadays, it's global via Zoom. I quote you in every speech because when you said to me, just asking me that question lifted me. I think every one of your friends in this room will find asking themselves the question, asking someone else the question will lift them. But I will share a funny story. Someone from Australia Post, after we'd done their exec meeting, went home, asked his wife, asked his 14-year-old daughter, and asked his 16-year-old son, sent me the answers. And the wife's answer was inspiring.
Yeah.
The 14-year-old, it was optimism through the eyes of a child.
Okay.
And the 16-year-old told him to get effed. I said, maybe we'll ask him again in 3 months or so.
Yeah.
But there's lots of funny experiences that come from that.
Yeah. Oh, but you never
And
know that.
sometimes I'm down an alleyway and there are people smoking and I sort of walk up to them and they think I'm some preacher about to try and convert them. And
Oh, really?
I just want to ask you what makes you optimistic. There's this sense of relief. And so my sample might be a little bit skewed because people are on the streets in the CBD are almost always smokers.
Right. So you've actually done that, gone up to people like that while they're smoking and asked them the question.
I bowl up to women digging ditches in India.
Oh, amazing.
It's just anyone. It's not presidents and prime ministers are interesting, but they're so well formulated.
Yeah, sure.
You ask them a question, they're so articulate. But when you go and ask an Indian woman, who's obviously probably not even finished school, digging a ditch, and ask her what makes her optimistic, there's a real, to use a pun, earthiness, but a reality about it.
Which makes me wonder, so a lot of the examples you gave about people who are optimistic, they've had some really challenging experiences in their lives. So I wonder, does that help you to be more optimistic? And therefore the other side of it is if you haven't had such challenges, is it harder to be optimistic?
It's a brilliant question. Melbourne University did a study of refugee youth 18 months ago, and they were expecting, very negative results. The kids were suffering and felt detached. 90% of the kids felt they belonged to Australia. 88% were optimistic about their future careers.
Wow.
30% higher than the native-born population.
Wow.
So refugees are typically much more optimistic than native-born population. And then migrants themselves, again, the same. So if you look, for instance, at the catchment in Melbourne, there are 2 selective schools, McRob, well, there's now a few more, but the 2 main ones are McRob and Melbourne High. You look at the ethnic makeup of it, overwhelmingly migrant. They outcompete the native-born kids. And so maybe this coronavirus crisis, because there hasn't been a crisis in Australia for decades, will actually make a real difference to the resilience. And we've seen it, better neighbourhood stuff, even the National Cabinet, my God, even 4 Labor premiers and, 4 Liberals getting together and making decisions in the national interest. A lot of positivity out of crisis.
Absolutely. No, I think, sometimes when we have these crises, the best of humanity comes out, and that certainly makes me optimistic, that's for sure. So I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat box if there's any extra questions that's come out. There's been quite a few comments actually, Victor. So here's one. Well, there you go. Talk about what advice would you give to our state premier and our federal PM re the trade war with China? I personally find it hard. Sorry, I can't see the rest. I personally find it hard to be optimistic on that one.
That's a really difficult one. I went to China in the 1980s and went to Beijing University. So I was always very optimistic about the future of democracy in China. And I still am. Everyone I spent time with, whether it was in a village in Inner Mongolia, through to the elites, just like us, they want a good future for their children. They want a reasonable life for themselves. And they want yeah, a government, a life that's not full of government interference. So I think if we look in the medium to long term, the Communist Party of China is under incredible pressure. As people get wealthier and have more time to debate and think, they find themselves in danger. And the money that is sloshing out of China from the Communist Party, a bit, because they don't want to end up like the Soviet Union did. You know, most of the Communist Party people in the Soviet Union got caught knowing it wasn't about to happen. Only the KGB, you know, had got its money out. So you're seeing a lot of money coming out. So in the long term, I think, you know, there may be upheaval, but China in the end is not going to put up with a dictator for life. And I think he's under a lot of pressure. So in being so aggressive, you know, in trying to protect themselves, they become more aggressive.
Yeah.
And we're not the only countries that are being pushed around. You know, Germany, Denmark, you know, a whole lot of democratic countries and undemocratic countries are getting the same level of threat from China at the moment. So for us, you know, working in trade in the United States, I was always a bit annoyed how much of our trade promotion budget was going to China and not enough to the United States, not enough to Japan. You know, the United States, the richest market on earth, I think we had a fraction of the budget that the guys in China had.
Okay.
So, you know, barley sells all around the world. Beef sells all around the world. If you ask an American, like when I lived in San Francisco, most popular yogurt was called Wallaby yogurt. Right? People loved it. You'd be in a cafe on Route 66 and a truckie would hear your accent. He said, "Oh, I love that Foster's of yours," you know. Or, you know, the lawyer in Chicago says, "Oh, I love that red wine of yours." You know, authentic.
Did you know?
So, you know, there's a worldwide companies are pushing their weight around all around the world. And at some point, people have got to say enough.
Yeah.
And you've just got to hold your nerve as you're doing it. The nice thing here is it is bipartisan. You know, Albanese's been strongly supporting Morrison's position. The foreign minister and the shadow foreign minister speaking as one. So I think it's about holding your nerve and understanding that this is a dictatorship. Their population is really peeved with what happened and the virus. But unlike this country where we can all protest, or unlike America where everyone protests, there it's this simmering undercurrent. One day will blow up.
Yeah. So I think that's back to the definition of optimism, isn't it? It's about in the end, or in the medium to long term. So the other question that is also the question that came through, which is a tricky one, is about climate change. How can you be optimistic about climate change where, you know, a lot of people are trying to do the right thing and yet there's a lot of pushback and so on?
Yeah, and it's exactly the same. So we've actually got a resource devoted to climate optimism.
Okay.
And Christina Figueres, you know, who headed up COP, actually has set up a company called Global Optimism.
Oh, wow.
And has just published a book and is out on a speaking tour. Even Al Gore, you know, who wrote, did the film The Inconvenient Truth, is now optimistic about climate change. So if you actually have a look at what's happened during COVID, the diminution in CO2 emissions has been exactly what we actually need to solve the climate problem. So if we have a better normal, my chairman of the Centre for Optimism, Robert Masters, has actually coined the phrase a better normal. He says a new normal is not good enough, a better normal. We will see people walking more, using bicycles more. People now know that rapid change is possible. So if we look at telehealth, we've spent 20 years talking about telehealth. It happened in 3 weeks. All you needed was a fee to pay doctors to do it. And bang, everyone's doing it. You know, I wanted to go and see my doctor and his reception said, "Oh no, he'll do it to you over the phone," you know. So if you look at it, I've got, in fact, I've asked this question, you know, what makes you optimistic of the heads of the United Nations Environment Programme and the like. And they all believe it can be done. But you see, because pessimism stops you acting. You know, if you give up, nothing will happen. And this is the time when it proves that there are mass movements that can make a difference. So sure, I mean, the consequences, were we to do nothing, would be horrendous. But if you look, for instance, last year, the global energy industry actually reduced its CO2 output.
Mm-hmm.
So we're actually a bit like COVID, you know, flattening the curve.
Mm-hmm.
We're actually seeing a flattening of the curve in CO2 emissions. And this disaster of the virus has shown us that we can actually make changes. So, you know, will I ever fly to Sydney again for a 1 hour meeting? No.
No.
You know, I'm going to do it on Zoom.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's so true about because of COVID, we've seen so much change that we never thought we'd see. And so many people just do it because they have to. And so it's actually quite possible.
But the climate one's very difficult because, you know, you've got, there's a global elite who make their money from being negative.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, people who own the media channels, they make their money from bad news.
Yeah.
And they're pumping it out. And so, you know, I mean, I did a school the other day. I talked to a group of 14-year-olds and, you know, the questions were fantastic. And the history teacher rang me yesterday to just say, God, you've got 5 of them now turned into activists.
Oh, wow.
Because they couldn't be bothered. Oh, well, you know, the whole place is stuffed. Why would I bother to act?
Yeah.
Whereas optimism says, yeah, give it a go.
So have you ever had times where you felt more pessimistic and you had to come back to being more optimistic yourself?
No, I've gone through crisis. I mean, obviously, you know, as a child, my father died.
Yeah.
Yeah, politics wasn't easy, you know, particularly, it's very tough times in politics. But my nickname in Parliament was Smiley.
Right.
And so one of my friends who was in Parliament with me at the time said, can I use the word pissed off?
Yeah.
He said, oh, I tell you what used to piss them off was they'd be bad-mouthing you and you'd come into the room and smile at them, say, you know, how's the wife, how's the husband, how the kids, as if they were your best friends. So I think Machiavelli always said, keep your friends close and keep your enemies even closer.
Yeah.
So for me, this mannerism of the smile and just instinctively smiling at strangers and instinctively smiling at other people. So come back to that earlier question of how do you create an optimistic environment? It's a lot about smiling. It's a lot about laughing. It's a lot about caring about people. It's the humanity. So certainly tough times. And you know, look at my divorce. You know, I just like everyone who goes through a divorce. It's a very unpleasant time. But you know, in the end, this too shall pass.
So I think that's the key point, isn't it? When you go through crisis, you have difficult times, but not get sucked into the pessimism which drags you down, versus knowing that it'll pass and you'll come out of it.
Yeah, but it's easy to be dragged down by pessimists. I think, you know, one of the most difficult things, you know, is this notion of being in a toxic swamp. So my meditation guru, Charlie Hogg, always said to me, Victor, you can meditate as much as you like, but if you're in a toxic swamp, you will still absorb the poison. And that's why Bill George, for instance, the leadership guru from the United States, when I asked him, same question I asked you, what makes you optimistic? He said, surrounding myself with optimistic people. Surrounding myself with positive people. So I think the first bit of homework for everyone coming out of this is asking their spouse or their partner what makes you optimistic. The second bit of homework is having a look at who do you have lunch with? Who do you have a coffee with? Who do you spend your time with? Start rewriting the list so that the people you're spending time with are people who lift you rather than people who drag you down. And I mean, there's some techniques around that. I mean, if you're at an executive table, one of the things that's happened in Australia is critical analysis is now king. So a lot of times when you do a presentation on something absolutely brilliant and mind-boggling, you've got 3 people around the table who are just waiting to say, but.
Yeah.
But. And that drives you nuts, particularly if you put weeks and weeks of work into a presentation.
Yes.
And some smart aleck kills it off with, you know, some but. So we've all got to think about that. So I've become a big fan of appreciative inquiry.
Yes.
Where even if you disagree with the person, use the word and. It's like
Yes.
you. It's your calm leadership.
Yeah.
You've got it just right. You know, it's this notion of making someone feel good, feel calm, even if you disagree with them, because you're trying to get the better solution,
Mm-hmm.
not kill off their solution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So surrounding yourself with optimistic people is one thing. The other thing is you want to be the person infecting others with optimism, which it sounds like you certainly do, just simply by asking the question. So if you want to become that infectiously optimistic person, what tips do you have for people?
The best trick, I actually give this to men and women at checkouts. When you ask an Australian, how are you? So, you know, I walk up to you, Megumi,
Yeah.
good to see you, Megumi, how are you? 65% of Australians answer not bad or not too bad. It's a wasted question and a wasted answer. So I coach people into just an experiment for one day. I say, try it for one day, and then if it works, try it for a week. And instead of saying, how are you? Pause for a little bit to say, what's the best thing happening for you? Whatever comes natural to you. But what's the best thing happening for you? Or what's a good thing in your day? Or, you know, you'll find the expression that works for you. And it might work a different expression for different people. But it's this not using the wasteful question, how are you? It's try and bias the conversation towards the positive. What's the best thing happening for you? Or what's been good in your day? Or, yeah, to the kid, what did you learn? You know, what was the best thing in class?
Yeah.
And then at the other end, for you as the respondent, and again, you might try this on a different day or a different week as the experiment. Someone says, how are you? If you say, terrific, fantastic, great, you sound like an American. People sort of, me say, oh my God, you know, you've been to some sort of, you know, training in communication and convincing people. Pause like an actor. So, thank you for asking. Oh, look, I went to this really interesting session with Megumi today, or, you know, I had a fantastic coffee, or my teenage daughter gave me a hug before I left. But to bias the question to the positive. And if you do those tricks, you will stop people. When I asked one of our ambassadors, a very experienced woman, well-educated, what makes her optimistic, she said to me, Victor, you are the first person in my entire life to talk to me about optimism. So we've got on the website, I have the 11 habits of the optimist. So I don't know that I can rattle off 11 in a row, but smiling, number one, to remember to smile at people and greetings to stranger.
Yeah.
Number two is to change the greeting. You know, give those two things an experiment. Number three, gratitude is really, really important. And you don't have to go through the formal keeping a gratitude journal by your bed, but if you do, the science says that's better than taking antidepressants or anti-anxiety drugs. And in this country, we have the second highest rate of antidepressant and anti-anxiety drug taking in the world. We only follow Iceland. So this notion of, if those of you, I'm sure you've talked about it in your other sessions, but
yeah, I actually had a lady called Michelle Gibbings who's doing a PhD on gratitude, actually. So there's
Michelle's
a lot of good stuff. Oh, you know Michelle? Yeah, no, she's done some.
But the trick with it is, if you write it down, that it's the first thing you read in the morning. So you don't switch on the news. You know, whether you take your book and sit on the toilet, or you look at it next to your bed, rereading the three things that made your day yesterday. The science says it's astonishingly powerful.
Yeah, no, it's very powerful. So it's very much
yoga, meditation, walking in beauty. You and I both have lighthouses.
Yes.
You know, being in beautiful places. You know, Deepak Chopra, you know, who's you know, one of the favorite meditation teachers in the US. He says, yeah, you've got to eat beautiful things, go to beautiful places, drink things you like, listen to the music that makes you happy. If anyone wants a really beautiful song for optimism, on YouTube, you can key in Optimistic by a black supergroup called August Green. Okay. And if you watch and listen to that, you will just be lifted to the sky.
Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, well, that one will be good to look up. I'm just going to have another quick look at the chat box to see. Okay, I think we've answered quite a few of the questions. You know, if you have a toxic or a not so positive workplace, what do you do? So we talked a bit about that. No, I think that's pretty good. I'm just wondering, Victor, just we talked about when we were preparing early on that you wanted to ask the group what makes them optimistic. Would you like to do that? I thought
love to do
we
that.
could do that using Mentimeter, so people can just type it in and we'll see it on the screen. Would you be up to that?
I'm up for going round the circle if people want to do that, or doing it on the Mentimeter.
Okay. I'm not sure if people want to. I've got it set up on Mentimeter, so you could do it either way.
Okay.
So can I ask the group, please, to enter the same code and, oh, where's the other page? Sorry. It should be here.
Same code?
Yep, same code. And it should be a second page, which I set up.
51676.
Sorry, I had another page set up.
Well, Peter Spence, if he's still there, he's actually done it. He could show himself.
Okay. It's
Peter,
Peter
you
there.
up for sharing what makes you optimistic?
Yeah, that'd be great. There we go. What makes you optimistic? So yeah, if people want to join in and unmute, let us know what you think.
Now, I think listening to optimistic people, as Victor said, sharing time with optimistic people is so vital. The fact that he had the same response from prisoners as he did from taxation officers suggests to me that it's a personal influence that makes the difference. I personally find mindfulness and meditation very helpful for me because it just stabilises me, it clears my mind and enables me to get into an optimistic field, but it's still got to be stimulated. You've still got to surround yourself by optimistic people. And I love listening to Victor because he is an optimistic man.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. Here we go. I've got a few people typing in, so we can watch that as well. My beautiful family. That's lovely, isn't it? Yeah. So two or three people on family, life experience. So if people want to add, please do. There's volunteers. I also think when you give that, that can make us feel optimistic, or it certainly helps me. You know, these sessions have been wonderful for me more than anything else, actually, to be able to connect with people rather than just sitting and feeling miserable. So, yeah, so there's faith, there's calmness. Oh, there's a text, sorry, not a text, a chat box one where it says faith in who I truly am. That's beautiful. The code, those of you who can't see the code, is 513876. So quite a few people on family, on humanity, neighbourliness. I think that's certainly come up in the last few weeks.
Well, faith, that faith, whether it's faith in God or faith in humanity, is very powerful. And then, my friendships, you see, surrounding yourself with good people.
Yep.
Positive change, kindness. Kindness is very important.
Discovery, that's lovely.
Well, we had John Hagel, who's the Silicon Valley guru, on for one of our Optimism cafes the other day, and he talks about the passion of the explorer.
Ah, okay.
The passion of the explorer. The more you explore, the more interesting it becomes.
No,
I saw Kay Clancy on the list. Kay, are you on audio?
Let me have a look at the participant group.
But anyone who wants to share, just
jump in.
And I know Gordana's got some ideas on this, and Sandy as well.
Yeah. Oh, there's more coming through, so I'll just leave. I'll put it back up at the end. But
that's
given
a beautiful, that word
cloud, yeah, no, it's great, isn't it?
Look at that. Look at the middle two.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Family and humanity.
Yeah.
And other optimists.
Yep. So I might come back to this.
Very well-educated group here on optimism.
So I might come back to this screen in a tick, but I just wanted to share with people about what's coming up as well, because time is running out. It goes very quickly when you're having fun. So as per usual, please do leave any sort of takeaways or things that you want to leave for Victor and I in the chat box, please. That would be wonderful. Always love to read that at the end. And just to let you know, the next few weeks, we have a few amazing women coming along. We have Dr. Jenny Brockes, who is a medical doctor and specialist in brain health and high performance thinking. We're going to talk mental health, which I think is, again, very connected to today's talk about optimism, gratitude, all of those things. But she'll take a medical perspective on that also. We also then have Karen Hollenbach, a very different sort of topic. She's a LinkedIn training specialist, and she's going to talk about building connections on using LinkedIn and the fact that we can't physically connect. So how can you connect with people meaningfully that way? And then finally in June, middle of June, we've got Dana Eisenstein, who is going to talk about resilience and in particular, how to set boundaries and have some of those conversations in setting boundaries so that you can be resilient at this time, which I think will be amazing. Her specialty is in resilience and courageous conversations. So that's what's coming up. So let me finish off. Oh, the only other thing to mention, in a few weeks in June, middle of June, I'm also doing my mid-year webinar. So I did a start of the year webinar, and I thought, oh, might as well do a mid-year webinar. But I also thought connected to what our current situation is. So how can you thrive in your career while working remotely? And in particular, if you're a quieter professional, when you're working remotely, it could be easy to get forgotten. So what are some strategies you can work on? So that's something I'll be doing soon. And
that is brilliant, Megumi. That is absolutely brilliant.
Thank you. And my final thought about optimism is that one day we're going to be meeting like this. I would hope so, because that'll be almost like you're physically there.
Exactly.
For those of you who are any Star Wars fans. So let me finish off with this page because it's lovely. So thank you, everyone. Keith, you just joined. Did you want to say anything to finish off? Any comments about your optimism?
No, I'm optimistic when I attend sessions like this, Megumi. So we're meeting with 400 of our Rotary members on Sunday to help them prepare for another Rotary year, and they were the volunteers that I was referring to. I'm just really optimistic when we've got so many good people out there trying to do some good in the world. So
that's amazing.
Optimistic. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Keith. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining and having such an optimistic and positive conversation today. And thank you so much, Victor, for your insights into your optimism and research and all the people you've spoken to and all the stories you've shared, including your own story. So that was wonderful. So thank you so much, Victor. And thank you, everyone, for joining. I'll stop the recording there.